Disclaimer: this program contains graphic descriptions of real crimes. Viewer discretion is advised. All parties are presumed innocent until proven guilty in court. When the townspeople found Mayor Roland Vale's body floating in the river at sunrise, the silence was deafening. This wasn't just a leader lost. It was a secret exposed. The kind of secret whispered in late night phone calls, hidden in envelopes of cash, and bound tightly in the arms of a girl half his age. But secrets don't drown quietly. They rise, they claw their way to the surface, and when Roland's lifeless body surfaced with that silk tie still knotted around his throat, the entire town of Brinton realized the truth. The man who owned their votes had gambled his life on a love he was never meant to have. Roland Vale had always been a storybook figure in Brinton, a wealthy steel magnate turned mayor. He was the kind of man who shook your hand firmly, remembered your name, and kissed your baby's forehead during parades. He built parks, sponsored scholarships, and threw the kind of July festivals that made the town glow under strings of carnival lights. To many, he wasn't just a leader, he was the town's crown jewel. And then there was Lorraine, his wife. Elegant, stoic, and untouchable, she never raised her voice, never misplaced a pearl necklace, never broke her posture even when Roland slipped into scandals that smelled like smoke. She was the first lady of Brinton in every sense. But crowns, no matter how polished, hide their cracks, and Roland's crack was a 23-year-old waitress named Maya Reid, a girl who poured coffee by day, studied textbooks by night, and tried to dream bigger than the life she'd been dealt. At first, it seemed harmless, an older man mentoring a young woman with promises of scholarships and opportunities. But the glances lasted too long, the envelopes of cash came too often, and soon Roland wasn't mentoring. He was keeping her an apartment in the renovated mill, a pearl white car under a fake company's name, weekend trips booked under aliases, the kind of gifts that didn't whisper affection. They screamed ownership. Everyone knew, but no one dared to say it aloud. That's the way small towns protect their powerful. Look away, pretend, and wait for the storm. What no one knew,
he built
what no one
parks,
could have predicted,
sponsored scholarships,
was that the
and
storm
threw the
wouldn't
kind of
end
July
in shame or
festivals that
scandal.
made the town
It would
glow
end
under
in
strings
death.
of
Maya never meant to fall for him. At least that's what she told herself. He was twice her age, wore power like a second skin, and walked into the penny cat diner with the kind of smile that made even the cook straighten his apron. He would leave her folded $100 bills under napkins, whispering, "Don't let anyone see." At first, it was easy to justify. She wasn't in love. She was just surviving. Rent was covered. Tuition was manageable. And for once, her future didn't look like a dim hallway of overdue bills. That was the lie she clung to, but Roland didn't just want her gratitude. He wanted her time, her silence, her soul. He called at midnight, insisting she come to him. He texted during her classes, "Just step out for 5 minutes, no one will notice." His presence seeped into every corner of her life until she couldn't tell if she was living for herself or orbiting him. Roland told himself a lie, too, that he was building something, that their affair was not a reckless hunger, but a bridge to a future. Bridges, he said one night, his lips brushing her ear, always look like risk until they're finished. But bridges built on lies don't hold. Because one night in October, Maya sat on the bathroom floor, staring at a test she couldn't untake. 2 pink lines stared back at her. Her breath caught, her chest tightened. She whispered into the empty room, "Oh God, what do I do now?" Roland's reaction wasn't the embrace she wanted. He didn't cradle her or say, "We'll get through this together." He paced like a man cornered. He spoke in numbers, optics, strategy. There are options, Maya, quiet ones. We can handle this discreetly. A clinic, a trip out of state. Nobody has to know. Nobody has to know. The same words he'd used since the beginning. But this time Maya shook her head. Her voice trembled, but her resolve didn't. No more secrets, Roland. This baby is mine. And yours. Either you stand by me, or I'll stand alone, but I won't disappear. For the first time in their affair, Roland Vale felt the one thing he never felt in business or politics, fear. And as he kissed her forehead and whispered, "We'll talk Friday after the fundraiser. Meet me at the ferry dock, no one will know." Maya had no idea that this meeting wouldn't be about plans for a future. It would be about survival. Friday night arrived wrapped in champagne and false smiles. At the Vale Conservatory fundraiser, Roland Vale looked every inch the golden mayor. Tailored suit, bourbon glow, a joke on his lips for every donor. Lorraine, his wife, stood beside him like a queen carved from marble, pearls at her throat, patience in her eyes. But Roland wasn't listening to the speeches. He wasn't thinking about donors or tax levies. His mind kept circling the same words: pregnant, public, mine, by 11:17 p.m. He slipped from the ballroom through a side door. No one noticed, except Lorraine, who turned her head just enough to watch him vanish into the night. Down by the ferry dock, the world felt smaller. The river whispered under the boards, black and endless. Maya was already there, wrapped in a red scarf against the chill. She clutched a grocery bag with a broken phone inside, the one that still carried his last text, "Meet me, no one will know." "You're late," she said, her voice sharp from waiting too long. "You look tired." He answered, but his eyes darted everywhere but her face. "Maya didn't waste time. I told you, no more secrets. I'm keeping this baby. Either you acknowledge it, or I'll go to the press tomorrow." Roland's jaw tightened. He was used to controlling conversations, steering them like city budgets. But this was different. This was a girl who had nothing left to lose. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Do you know what you're saying? You'll destroy me. You'll destroy yourself. Lorraine already knows." Maya snapped, her voice cutting through the night. "Don't you see? It's over. All your bridges are collapsing." For the first time, Roland reached out and grabbed her wrist. Tight, too tight. "You don't get to threaten me." But Maya didn't flinch. Her eyes burned with a stillness that chilled him more than her words. "I'm not threatening you. I'm telling you." That's when it happened. From beneath the dock, another set of footsteps. Soft at first, then deliberate. Roland froze. Maya's eyes flicked over his shoulder. A shadow detached itself from the black, and suddenly they weren't alone. The gulls screamed overhead as the figure moved closer. And in that instant, Roland Vale, the man who ruled Brinton with a handshake and a smile, realized that this meeting at the ferry dock was no longer about saving his reputation. It was about saving his life. The air down by the dock was razor thin, cutting through silk and bone alike. Roland Vale, Brinton's golden mayor, had his hand clamped around Maya's wrist. She stood rigid, her red scarf fluttering in the night air, her eyes steady and yielding. "You'll ruin everything," Roland hissed. His voice wasn't the polished charm of the campaign trail. It was raw, cornered. "You think the town will believe you over me, over us. You're a mistake, Maya. Don't make yourself a fatal one." She pulled back just enough to make him stumble. "This isn't about the town anymore," she said, voice trembling but sharp. "This is about me, about this child, and you don't get to erase us." That's when the shadow stepped closer, boots against wet planks. The scrape of wood where silence should have been. Roland froze, eyes darting to the figure emerging from the dark. "Who's there?" he barked, his mayor's authority fraying. No answer, just breathe, heavy, deliberate. The gulls shrieked overhead, as if mocking the silence. The ferry chain rattled like an omen. Roland's grip on Maya tightened in panic. She cried out, not in fear, but in fury. She shoved him back with all the strength she had. His heel slid against the slick dock, and for a suspended heartbeat the mayor of Brinton teetered between power and gravity. Then a splash, a roar of black water swallowing silk and skin. Maya gasped, stumbling forward to the railing, staring into the churn where his head should have resurfaced. The water rippled, bubbled, and then nothing. Roland Vale was gone. The shadow stood a few feet away, watching, breathing, then bending low. A velvet pouch glinted briefly in its hands, the mayor's last gift, or maybe a bribe meant for silence. The figure pocketed the jewel, glanced once at Maya, and slipped back into the reeds without a word. Maya's chest heaved, her wrist burned where his fingers had been. She stared at the river, at the black mouth that had swallowed him whole, and whispered, half to herself, half to the night, "O God, what have we done?" The gulls answered. The river kept its secret. For now, by dawn, the river had coughed up its secret. Roland Vale's body lay zipped inside a black bag, the silk tie still twisted around his throat. Deputies dragged the dock with poles, while gulls circled like they'd known the ending all along. If Mel Pike stood with his hands buried deep in his jacket, watching. He'd seen accidents, he'd seen drunks fall into ditches, he'd seen the river take more lives than it gave back. But this wasn't the sloppy hand of chance. This smelled like a story polished to hide a mess. And Brinton smelled blood in the water. At the Penny Cat Diner, spoons froze mid. Stir as whispers spread. It was the mistress. A woman hissed. No, it was Lorraine. Don't you see? Wives don't stay quiet forever. Others muttered that maybe the mayor's enemies had finally evened the score. By noon, the town had split into camps, those who wanted the affair buried with the body, and those who wanted revenge carved into someone's skin. Sheriff Pike didn't have the luxury of sides. He went to the textile mill apartment where Maya lived. She opened the door, pale and sleepless, her eyes ringed red from a night of silence. The sink still ran in the background, like she'd left it on to drown out the memory of the splash. "Where were you last night?" Pike asked, flat. Maya swallowed hard. "By the river. He told me to meet him." "What happened?" Her voice cracked. "He slipped, he fell, that's all." Pike looked at her wrist, the faint bruises blooming there like fingerprints. Anyone else there? Her eyes flickered, left then right. No one who matters. Pike didn't press. Not yet. He'd been a sheriff long enough to know when a witness was telling half the truth, and half the truth is often worse than a lie. That night, a call came into the sheriff's office, anonymous. A man's voice, raspy, urgent. "Check the pawn shop. This morning, something shiny crossed the counter. You'll know it when you see it." The next morning, deputies slid a glass case open at Water Street Pawn. Inside lay a diamond brooch, the one Lorraine Vale had inherited from her grandmother, last seen pinned to her gown at the fundraiser. The shopkeeper shrugged. "Kid sold it at dawn. Boots muddy as sin. Said his name was Evan Tully." Sheriff Pike closed his notebook. The mayor's secrets were spreading like cracks in glass, and the question wasn't just who pushed Roland Vale. It was who else wanted him gone. Evan Tully wasn't the kind of shadow people noticed. 19, maybe 20. A kid who drifted between couches, boatyards, and the underpass near the pier. Mud on his boots, hunger in his eyes. To Brinton, he was a ghost, too unimportant to matter. Until he walked into the pawn shop at dawn, slid a velvet pouch across the counter, and traded a family heirloom for 40 crumpled bills and a promise of silence. Now he mattered. Sheriff Pike found him by the pier, leaning against a rusted railing with a cigarette he could barely afford. Evan didn't run when Pike approached. He just flicked ash into the water and said, "Guess you're here about the brooch. Start talking." Pike said. Evan shrugged. "I didn't kill the mayor. I just saw things, took the shiny thing after. Dumb, yeah, but murder, no." What did you see?" "A fight that wasn't a fight," Evan muttered, his eyes locked on the horizon. He grabbed her. She didn't scream. She just stood there like she'd had enough for 10 lifetimes. Then, slip, splash, gone. "You're telling me Maya didn't push him?" Pike pressed. "I'm telling you gravity did the job, but nobody believes gravity when there's a mistress in the story." Pike studied him. Evan's words rang like truth, but his eyes held something else, something unspoken. Meanwhile, Maya's life was closing in like a vice. At the diner, customers stopped meeting her eyes. The college quietly postponed her enrollment. By sunset, a crowd had gathered outside her building, half curious, half cruel, waiting for the sheriff to bring her out in cuffs. When Pike knocked on her door again, Maya didn't ask him in. She stood in the doorway, trembling, defiant. "You think I killed him," she whispered. "I think you know more than you're saying." Pike replied. Her hands tightened on the doorframe. "He told me he'd handle it. That's all he ever said, I'll handle it. But he didn't, not this time. He slipped, Sheriff. The river took him, that's all." Pike tilted his head. "Then why does a kid with muddy boots have your husband's brooch in his pocket?" Her face drained of color. What brooch? The silence stretched, heavy as waterlogged wood. For the first time, Maya realized she wasn't just fighting whispers. She was fighting evidence, and in Brinton, evidence had a way of drowning the truth. The district attorney stood on the courthouse steps, tie knotted too tight, sweat glistening under the autumn sun. Reporters shoved mics forward. The town waited for a verdict not from a jury, but from the man who owed half his career to Roland Vale's fundraisers. In the interest of justice, he declared, "We will be pursuing charges against Maya Reid for the murder of Mayor Roland Vale." The crowd erupted. Gasps, applause, shouts of homewrecker and murderess echoed down Main Street. For Brinton, the headline was already written. The mistress killed the mayor. Sheriff Pike didn't clap. He lit a cigarette he wouldn't finish. He'd seen DA play this game before. Pick the most convenient villain, paint them guilty, and let the town sleep easier at night. But something in his gut twisted. Evidence didn't add up. Too many shadows still moved at the edges of this story. At the textile mill, Maya's apartment door shook under the fists of protesters. "Killer," they screamed. "Baby killer." She pressed her back against the door, clutching her stomach, whispering to the child inside, "I didn't push him." "I didn't." In the interrogation room, Evan Tully sat slouched, arms crossed, eyes bloodshot. "You're wasting your time," he muttered. "She didn't do it. I saw it. He slipped. But you don't care about truth. You care about spectacle. Then why'd you steal the brooch?" Pike asked. Evan smirked. "Because poor kids don't get scholarships from mayors. We get scraps. I saw a chance. I took it. Doesn't make me a killer. Doesn't make her one either." And Lorraine Vale, she sat in her sprawling home with curtains drawn, sipping tea that had long gone cold. The press wanted grief. The town wanted answers, but Lorraine gave them nothing, just silence, and silence, in Brinton, was its own confession. The trial loomed. The courthouse buzzed. And Maya Reid, alone, bruised and carrying the weight of Roland's final secret, stood at the center of a storm she could not escape, because in this town, truth didn't matter, stories did, and the story Brinton had chosen was hers. The courthouse in Brinton had never seen a trial like this. People lined up before sunrise, spilling into the street. Some came to see justice. Others came to see a scandal turned into theater. Everyone came to see Maya Reid, the mistress, the alleged murderer, fight for her life. Inside, the courtroom smelled of wood polish and sweat. The DA sat smug, flanked by binders stacked like weapons. He painted Maya in broad strokes, a jealous lover, cornered by broken promises, driven by rage. His voice thundered with certainty. She snapped. She killed him. But the defense painted a different picture. Maya as the victim of a powerful man's lies, promises, and control. A girl dragged into the orbit of a mayor who thought secrets could be managed like budgets. Roland Vale slipped that night. The young attorney argued, and the only crime my client is guilty of is surviving him. Then came the witnesses. Evan Tully slouched in the stand, defiant. I saw it. He grabbed her. She didn't push him. He slipped. Gravity did the rest. He smirked at the jury. You want a killer, blame the river. The DA snapped at him, but the words stuck. The ferry operator testified next. Nervous, shifting in his seat, he admitted seeing a pearl. White sedan parked crooked by the East Trail that night. The kind of car not many in Brinton owned. All eyes turned, for just a moment, toward Lorraine Vale. And when Lorraine herself took the stand, the air thickened. She wore black silk, her pearls absent this time. Her voice was steady, her grief measured. Yes, I knew about the affair, she said, eyes never leaving the jury. I knew about her, but I was at the fundraiser all night. I never left. The DA nodded solemnly. The defense tilted her head. Sheriff Pike, watching from the back row, narrowed his eyes. He'd seen the valet log. He knew her car had been missing for 30 minutes. Lorraine's lie glistened in the light, too perfect, too rehearsed. Then came the final blow. The DA read aloud Maya's last text to Roland. Meet me at the ferry dock. No one will know. He let the silence after it linger like a noose. But the defense pounced. Those words weren't hers, she argued. That phrase, no one will know, was his refrain, his condition, the cage he built around her life. That text wasn't a threat. It was an echo. The jury shifted. The reporters scribbled. Lorraine's fingers tightened around a tissue that hadn't touched her face. For the first time, the trial wasn't just about Maya. It was about Roland's lies, about Lorraine's silence, about a town that chose the story it wanted instead of the truth it feared. And in that silence, Sheriff Pike felt it. The shift. Suspicion wasn't just circling Maya anymore. It was circling Lorraine Vale. The jury filed back into the courtroom after 2 days that felt like years. The foreman's voice trembled as he read, "Not guilty." Gasps rippled through the gallery. Some cheered, others hissed. But in that instant, Maya Reid was free, at least on paper. She collapsed against her attorney, sobbing into her hands. Relief, grief, and fear tangled inside her like barbed wire. The DA face curdled. He had staked his career on this case. Now the town whispered about his failure almost as loudly as they whispered about Maya's survival. But Sheriff Pike wasn't listening to the crowd. His eyes were locked on Lorraine Vale. She sat perfectly still, her chin high, her eyes dry. To the casual onlooker, she was every bit the grieving widow, composed, dignified. But Pike saw it, the tiniest tremor at her jaw, the way her knuckles whitened around a folded tissue that had never touched her cheek. After court, Lorraine slipped out the side door, away from cameras. Pike followed. He found her in the marble ladies' lounge, staring at her reflection in the gilded mirror. "You lied," he said softly. She didn't flinch. "About what?" "You weren't at that fundraiser all night. Your car was gone. 30 minutes missing. The ferry operator saw it. You were there." Lorraine's reflection blinked, slow and deliberate. "Prove it." Pike stepped closer. "I don't need to prove it. You already just did." For the first time her mask cracked. Her voice, low, sharp, spilled like venom. "Do you know what it's like living with a man who thinks secrets are a kind of currency? He bought her like he bought everything else. And when she threatened his perfect little world, he panicked. I followed him that night because I wanted to see him squirm, and I did. I saw him slip. I saw him drown." Her eyes met Pike's in the mirror, "and I let him." The words hung in the air, heavier than a gavel. Lorraine Vale hadn't pushed her husband, but she hadn't saved him either, and in Brinton, that was enough to turn rumor into damnation. As Pike left her there, alone with her reflection, he knew one thing. The verdict may have freed Maya, but the truth about Roland's death was far from finished. because some murders don't happen with hands. They happen with silence. Brinton did what small towns always do when scandal burns too hot to hold it, rewrote the story. The editorials called Roland Vale a complicated man. The church sermons called him a cautionary tale. And the whispers in the grocery aisles called him something else entirely, a fool brought down by his own secrets. Maya Reid moved into a small apartment above a florist. People didn't look her way with quite as much venom anymore, though the word mistress would cling to her like a scar. She kept her head down, focused on the child growing inside her, and swore she would never let silence kill her again. Evan Tully took a job at the boatyard, his muddy boots finally finding honest ground. When asked about the night at the dock, he only ever said the river wanted him more than we did, and Lorraine Vale, she faded from the spotlight, no more galas, no more pearls at the hospital fundraisers. But those who saw her in town swore she carried herself differently now, lighter, as though watching Roland slip beneath the water had freed her from a prison no one else could see. Sheriff Pike walked the ferry dock one last time before winter set in. He watched the river lap against the pilings, black and endless, and thought of all the stories it still held, stories of men who thought power could outswim consequence, stories of women who knew when silence was its own kind of weapon. The mayor's death was ruled an accident. The files were closed, the town carried on, but the river remembered, because some truths don't drown, they wait, and Brinton knew sooner or later the water would rise again. Power, secrets, silence. In Brinton, it was enough to kill a man without anyone laying a hand on him. Roland Vale's affair may have ended in the river, but the echoes of what really happened still ripple through that town. Was it gravity? Was it neglect? Or was it a murder built out of silence? In the end, the wealthy mayor didn't just drown in the river. He drowned in his own lies, and the river keeps the rest.